That you're all here. Welcome, welcome. So what we're here today to do is to answer a question. Is zip code economic destiny for Oregon's kids? My name is Georgia Lee Hussey. I'm the founder and CEO of Modernist Financial. We are a B Corp wealth management firm founded to help people structure their wealth around their values. I'm also a member, very proudly, of OCF's Metropolitan Portland Leadership Council, one of the ways that OCF gathers people in the community to give feedback on what we're experiencing as Oregonians. And when I learned about OCF's research into the lived experiences of Oregon's kids, I was inspired, and I really wanted to work with OCF to share the information more broadly. Now, as a certified financial planner who helps support folks in making values-based financial decisions, I know that there are phases to understanding how to make a grounded decision, as whether it's tax planning, investments, or how we behave in our acts of generosity. And so there's three phases which we've really built into the structure of this conversation today. The first phase is always discovering our values, understanding the frame of reference that we're using to navigate the world. And we'll be doing that through a series of prompts that I will be guiding you through as a frame around the research, but also our own lived experiences. So that's how we understand our own frames and also sometimes discover our own values and goals for what is important to us. The next phase in making a values-based financial decision is understanding the system we're operating within. So in this instance, we want to understand, how does opportunity actually work in Oregon? And what are the factors that influence broader access for everyone? And then the final phase is, let's bring those two things together: values, frame of reference, structure, and then taking action in some way that feels authentic and grounded for ourselves. So today, this arc of journaling prompts is going to help us do that. So our goal is for you to understand how our acts of generosity can actually serve our community's needs as we understand them through this research, better understand the research, and then engage in some journaling actions so that you can clarify your stories, understand the research more deeply through your experience, and then maybe take some action. Now, I keep mentioning these journaling prompts, and you will see them arrive in the chat. You'll see a little PDF symbol, and if you double click on that, you can open up that file. It is fillable, and I will be guiding you through the questions. If you signed up early, we sent you a packet in the mail, so you actually have an old-fashioned paper copy, and so you may need a writing utensil for that project as well. Also wanted to let you all know we'll be sending a comprehensive follow-up email that has information with all the organizations we mentioned. It has a link to the report. It will have a video of this conversation. So if you want to share it with other people to help engage them in an intentional relationship to this research, we would love for you to do so. I want to spend a special thank you to Jen Grimes and Tracy Rogers, Jen from OCF and Tracy from Modernist, who's helping take care of technology. Always a wonderful project. Thank you for your support. If you have any tech questions, you're welcome to chat, and the chat you have available to you will get you to Jen or Tracy, and they can answer your questions to keep technology being a support for the conversation. I am really pleased to have Max Williams here to help begin our conversation. Max is a long-term time leader in Oregon, helping make us a stronger and healthier state. Since 2012, Max has been the CEO and president of Oregon Community Foundation, and in this role has been instrumental in mobilizing philanthropic dollars to leverage private and public partnerships to scale up impact for Oregonians. With Max's leadership, OCF leads by seeking out community-led solutions and investing in research and innovation. I'm really pleased to welcome Max to begin our conversation. Max.
Well, thanks, Georgia, and thank you for being such a tremendous partner in philanthropy and with OCF and your volunteer work. And thanks for bringing us together today. I thought it might be helpful just briefly to begin with a little context about the Oregon Community Foundation, because even within community foundations and our business model, OCF is somewhat unique. We're among a handful of statewide community foundations in the country. Most community foundations are typically focused on a city or a county or a region. OCF is nearing its 50th anniversary, and we remain very committed to our statewide reach, which affords us strong partnerships and diverse perspectives in a tremendous network of generosity as we literally work with thousands of donors all across Oregon. We at OCF, we know the Modernist financial manifesto, which is our greatest wealth is our personal relationships. And we really embrace that notion in the work that we do at OCF every day with our statewide network of relationships with a wide variety of Oregonians, be they donors, volunteers, community leaders, nonprofit leaders. This network is really what gives OCF its strength. And we really value the fact that we get to live and work with generous Oregonians, all trying to make Oregon the place that it could be. It's been a challenging 18 months, I think, for all of us. And like all of you, March 2020 is going to be remembered at the Oregon Community Foundation as the beginning of more than a year-long statewide community crisis response. It's challenged us, I think, more than at any other time in the Community Foundation's history, but it's also really demonstrated our most vital role, which is to mobilize and deploy resources where they're needed the most. Between the pandemic, the resurgent racial justice movement, and the devastating wildfires that blanketed our state in 2020, these crises sort of collectively exposed deep vulnerabilities in the social safety net and the ways that we're caring for and taking care of our most vulnerable Oregon population. For OCF, this meant deploying in 2020 a record-setting $227 million to nearly 4,000 nonprofits across the state, and doing it in record time, really focused on frontline communities that were experiencing urgent needs. And these funds came from a variety of sources, from OCF's own funds, from our donors, from donors throughout the community, from our philanthropic partners, and even state resources, as we were asked to help the state figure out how to deploy resources quickly to folks who needed it. All this allowed OCF to get dollars to the communities and really to support the nonprofit infrastructure in Oregon that we rely so heavily on, particularly during times of crisis, to deliver these essential community-based services. Now, it didn't take long for all of us, I think, to recognize that these crises weren't impacting people the same way, and that some communities were being disproportionately impacted. And we quickly shifted to ensure that our resources were focusing on those disproportionate impacts on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, low-income Oregonians, and rural communities that were all experiencing this disproportionate impact. One of the ways we're working to address this general issue of disproportionality and impacts has been informed by the report that you'll be discussing today. It's called Cornerstones: Economic Mobility and Belonging in Oregon. The report combines census tract level data of economic opportunity with quality examinations of what helps kids in high opportunity neighborhoods succeed. We've been focusing on this gap, this thing we call the opportunity gap for Oregon's children for a number of years at OCF. And we've had the opportunity to work with Professor Raj Chetty and his group from Harvard called Opportunity Insights on a project that looks at this data and also examines community capital in communities where kids who have experienced or should be experiencing these disproportionate impacts have seemed to perform better. And that seems to make a difference in the outcome for Oregon's young people. You'll learn more about these findings from my colleague, Madeline Brandt, who's joining us today. She's one of our talented OCF research officers. Madeline's been with OCF for 5 years and brings a background in public health to her work. In addition to the research she's sharing with you today, she also works on OCF's long-term initiatives in the arts education, and children's dental health. But before we turn it over to Madeline and the report, I believe Georgia now is going to lead you through some of the journaling exercises she discussed. And before I give it back to Georgia, I just want to say thank you for all the good work that you do in community, and to say thanks specifically for Georgia and Modernist Financial for bringing us together today. Back to you, Georgia.
Thanks so much, Max. I'm really grateful to be able to start this conversation. So this is the prompts again, without my scrawled notes on it. So if you can go ahead and pull that up, and we're gonna have about 2 minutes now to answer some questions that will help build awareness about your own lived experiences. So go ahead and open up that PDF, grab a pen or pencil or marker. And we're going to answer a few questions. And I'd like you to start by just closing your eyes and thinking about where you grew up. Think about walking out your front door. Imagine what it smelled like, looked like. What was the built environment like? Who was around? I'd like you just write down a few of the first things that come to your mind, thinking about the place you grew up. Again, just the first things that come to mind. What kind of cars did you see around, if any? Were there a lot of trees or not? Are there any scents in your memory? Smell is a very powerful tool in the ways we remember the world. Now for the next question. When you became an adult, did you leave the place where you grew up or did you stay? Go ahead and write down that answer. And anything else that comes up with that question. Now think about walking out your front door this morning or the last time you walked out your front door. And again, envision, what was the scene in front of you? What did you notice? Sense, smells, built environment, natural habitat. Is it similar to where you grew up or is it different? What I'd like you to write down is what's similar or different from your neighborhood as a kid. And again, this is just to get the mind thinking a little bit more deeply about our lived experiences. And these questions sound basic, but they tell us a lot about the socioeconomic circumstances that we grew up in. So I want you to keep these prompts in mind as we continue learning from the research that we'll share today. It is my pleasure to introduce Madeline Brandt, one of OCF's talented research officers, who will share more about what we know about opportunity and place in Oregon.
Thank you so much, Georgia, and thank you everybody for being here today. It really means a lot to see all of your faces and to see you here. And thank you for taking the time to think through those journaling prompts. It's really intended to help frame the research that we're going to talk about today in a little bit more personal way, and I think it can kind of help us to get into the right headspace. So today we're going to talk about the Tracking Oregon's Progress, or TOP report. The TOP report series explores social and economic trends in Oregon. And we at OCF have published one almost every year since 2014. The three most recent TOP reports have explored the opportunity gap, which is a lens, as Max mentioned in his opening, that OCF adopted back in 2016. The opportunity gap is about the deep disparities that exist in every aspect of our lives, from health and education to employment and housing. Children from low-income families, children of color, and children in under-resourced rural communities simply do not have the same opportunities at home, in school, or in their communities as higher income and white Oregonians do. These gaps in opportunity are a result of systemic inequities. Our latest TOP report that we released earlier this year is an exploration of the opportunity gap, this time looking deeply at the connections between economic opportunity and place. The report is called Cornerstones, Economic Mobility and Belonging in Oregon, and it brings together groundbreaking quantitative and qualitative research about communities across the state. In our report, we describe where in Oregon low-income kids have the best chances of moving out of poverty and why. I know that many of you have the physical report, which is really exciting, and we'll be sending out a link to the web version and follow-up as well. The report is lengthy, as you'll know if you have it in your hot little hands. And we'll have time today to touch on many of the topics that the report explores, but not to go deeply into some of them. So I hope that this gives you a good overview of what's in it, and it also makes you interested and excited to think more deeply about the research and about the work. Before we begin, I do have a caveat to share. I wouldn't be a good researcher if I didn't start with a caveat or two. As we go through the data today, I encourage you to avoid thinking about neighborhoods as good or bad, but thinking much more deeply and expansively about the places where we live. I think that this data gives us an opportunity to consider our collective responsibility to communities and to think about how we ensure that all kids have opportunities to thrive. So before we look more closely at Oregon, let's ground ourselves in some national trends. Across the US, economic mobility has been on the decline for many decades. For the first time in American history, children who are born today are unlikely to earn as much as their parents once they are adults. We know that children born into poverty and children of color are even less likely to get ahead. New research is making the case that economic success is largely determined by structural factors and not individual characteristics. This flies in the face of many of the ideas that we and our parents and grandparents may have been raised with. But we've come to understand the impact of structural factors on our economic outcomes. And these structural factors are things like the neighborhoods where we grow up, our educational experiences, and the impacts of institutional, historic, and structural discrimination. One organization that is studying these trends is called Opportunity Insights, and it's led by the economist Raj Chetty at Harvard. Opportunity Insights has analyzed 4 decades of census and IRS data on 20 million Americans born between 1978 and 1983. So it's people who are now in their early 30s and late 40s. This data set is massive, and they've used this to create the Opportunity Atlas, which makes connections between outcomes and neighborhood. The primary focus is economic mobility, whether children will grow up to earn more than their parents. They also explore other outcomes like incarceration, graduation, and employment, and how these outcomes vary based on the places where we grow up. This is a screenshot of the atlas that you're seeing right now on your screen. And we'll be following up with a link to the atlas as well, because it's all publicly available and you can explore it further. And if you haven't looked at the tool, I really encourage you to do so. It's fascinating to look at the place where you live, or where you grew up, or where your spouse grew up, and to think about the role that place can play in all of our lives.
What I was going to do.
So through the Atlas, we've gained some new insights into the relationship between economic mobility and place. And among these insights are 3 major findings. First, the immediate neighborhood has a really big impact. Kids growing up in families with similar incomes in neighborhoods just a few miles apart can experience vastly different outcomes. The second big finding from the Atlas is that structural racism and discrimination play important roles in economic mobility. For kids growing up in the same neighborhoods in families with similar incomes, outcomes vary by gender, race, and ethnicity. One striking example from the Atlas that really illustrates this concept is that there is not a single neighborhood in the United States where white boys and Black boys who grow up at the same income level will grow up to do the same economically. As a group, the white boys will always do better. This pattern is consistent in every community across the country, and it tells us that structural racism and discrimination play a really important role in economic mobility. The third finding is that when we change neighborhoods, we change as well. The more time a child spends growing up in what's called a high opportunity neighborhood, the more they can expect to earn in adulthood. This means that when we change our neighborhoods, either by moving or by improving the neighborhoods in which we live, it has a real material impact on kids' economic outcomes in adulthood. So, what makes a neighborhood high opportunity for a low-income kid? Opportunity Insights identified several neighborhood level factors that contribute to economic mobility. And in the top report, we looked deeply at 4. First is employment rates, whether people in the neighborhood have jobs. When it comes to economic mobility, employment rates are a much more important measure than job growth. Employment rates are about whether people have access to the training and education that they need to secure a job, as well as physical access to that job. Job growth in an area can be high, but if those jobs are filled by people who live in other neighborhoods or who move into the area, it doesn't have much impact on the economic mobility of the people who already live in that place. Second is the quality of schools, which is measured by things like student test scores, class sizes, graduation rates, and teacher retention. And of course, school quality is deeply affected by school funding. It's actually hard to overstate just how important school quality is to economic mobility. It's responsible for about half of economic mobility differences across neighborhoods. And so it's just tremendously important. The third neighborhood level factor is integration, both economic and racial integration. When it comes to economic integration, we know that growing up in a high poverty neighborhood negatively impacts low-income kids. And researchers are especially concerned about concentrated poverty, areas with a poverty rate of 20% or higher. About 7% of kids in Oregon, or 57,000 kids, live in areas of concentrated poverty. And compared to high poverty neighborhoods, mixed income and higher income neighborhoods have larger tax bases and can fund better quality schools, services, and healthcare. When affluent families are geographically isolated, low-income families are negatively affected, but it's about more than just the tax base. It's also about access to social capital, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Then there's also racial integration, which is also tremendously important. There's a fair amount of research about how growing up in racially segregated neighborhood negatively impacts low-income kids of color, often in ways that are tangled up with economics and a lack of social and political power. The bottom line is that we know that low-income kids who grow up in economically and racially integrated neighborhoods are more likely to move out of poverty. The fourth neighborhood level factor that contributes to economic mobility is social capital. Social capital is the cohesion and sort of sense of community in a neighborhood. In places with high social capital, neighbors know each other, and there's a strong sense of belonging. Social capital is also about access to collective resources. And this includes informal support from emergency funds to mutual aid or job leads or childcare. It's also about access to social and civic networks and political capital. It's about being connected to those in power so that our voices are heard and our needs are more likely to be understood and met. So let's look a little bit more closely at Oregon. This is the really juicy stuff, right? We worked with Opportunity Insights to look at high opportunity communities in Oregon, places where children growing up in low-income families are more likely to be economically mobile. They also helped us look at low opportunity communities, so the places where low-income kids are least likely to break the cycle of poverty as adults. The unit that they used for their study is pairs of census tracts. Each census tract contains about 4,000 people. And in some rural areas, whole counties are just 2 census tracts. Like you'll see here, Wallowa and Lake County are both on here. And that's just because the population is so small. In urban areas, census tracts are closer approximations of neighborhoods. On this map, the high opportunity communities are in blue and the low opportunity communities are in orange. And there are a couple of really important trends, I think, to note here. 7 of the 10 high opportunity communities, or highest opportunity communities rather, for low-income kids are in rural Oregon. And all of the lowest opportunity neighborhoods are along the I-5 corridor. So these are neighborhoods in North and Northeast Portland, in Salem, and in Medford. These are also neighborhoods with high numbers of residents of color. Opportunity Insights has done a lot of work across the country in urban communities, looking at really small and immediate neighborhoods and how that impacts outcomes. And they wanted to know from us what makes these particular communities that you see here on this map unique. What can we say about how these places are supporting low-income kids, and especially what can we say about rural communities? They were particularly curious about places like Lake County and Wallowa County, where kids are growing up really far apart physically. In our top report, we focus on high opportunity communities I'm profiled for, and we highlighted the place-based factors that are particularly important to each of those places. But because many of you are based in the Portland area, we're going to focus today on some high and low opportunity communities in the greater metro area, where they are and what the data shows us. So one community that we highlight in the top report is Beaverton, which has some of the highest opportunity neighborhoods in Oregon for low-income kids, and specifically for low-income Latino children. Low-income kids who grow up in the West Beaverton and Highland neighborhoods earn an average of $39,500 annually as adults. And low-income Latinx kids in Central Beaverton and Vos neighborhoods earn $35,000 a year. This may not sound like a tremendous amount of money, it's not, but it is in the top 50th percentile nationwide. So it is exceptional when it comes to Oregon, and pretty good when it comes to national numbers. Low-income kids in these neighborhoods are benefiting from strong employment rates, good quality schools, and economically integrated communities. The overall child poverty rate in these neighborhoods is between 2 and 22%. And the Vos neighborhood in particular is a pretty interesting case study. It's one of the most diverse, but also one of the poorest areas of Beaverton. And at the same time, rents are lower and therefore more affordable than most other neighborhoods in the city. There's easy access to downtown, nearby parks and green spaces, and the local elementary school has a strong Spanish immersion program. And this brings us to what really stands out about these neighborhoods in particular, which is the quality of schools. These 4 neighborhoods had the highest test score measure, which is the proxy that we use for school quality, among all of the high opportunity communities in the state. Most students who live in these 4 neighborhoods attend Southridge or Beaverton high schools, both of which have higher than average on-time graduation and college-going rates compared to the state. We can contrast these outcomes with some low opportunity neighborhoods, where low-income kids are least likely to break the cycle of poverty. The lowest opportunity neighborhoods in the state are in North and Northeast Portland. In these neighborhoods, low-income kids grow up to earn an average of just $25,000 a year, so about a third less than the Beaverton neighborhoods that we were just looking at. To put this in perspective with some national data, the Cully, Piedmont, Boise, Elliott, and Albina neighborhoods are in the 5th to 8th percentile nationwide for low-income kids. In other words, low-income kids in 92 to 95% of neighborhoods in the US fare better economically than the low-income kids who grew up here. This is pretty staggering to me. So these North and Northeast Portland neighborhoods are some of Portland's traditionally Black neighborhoods and have been shaped by redlining, disinvestment, and more recently gentrification and displacement of many Black residents. These are also areas of concentrated poverty. I told you in the last slide that in those Beaverton neighborhoods, the percentage of children living in poverty was between 2 and 22%. In these Portland neighborhoods, the percentage of children living in poverty covers a much larger range and goes all the way up to 73% of kids who live in the Albina neighborhood live in poverty. This research in particular, it's really heavy with me. I was really shocked by these results. I'm from Northeast Portland. I know these places, I feel these places. This is one that was really, just really sat heavy with us. And I thought about it quite a bit since we first did this work. And it's really striking to see similar patterns in neighborhoods in Salem and in Medford. All of the neighborhoods in Oregon where low-income kids are the least economically mobile are neighborhoods with large proportions of children of color. And it shows that we as a state have been failing these communities for a very long time. So we've covered a ton of ground. Thank you so much for your attention. And before we ask you what you're going to do with what you've learned today, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what we're doing with this research here at OCF. The top report demonstrates that each community has a unique mix of assets, needs, and opportunities, and solutions need to be tailored to people and to place. At OCF, we're supporting many nonprofits who work in these neighborhoods and communities, and we're particularly focused on supporting leaders of color. Our grant programs focus on issues of housing and homelessness, school quality, early learning, and access to preschool, many of the factors that make neighborhoods strong and lead to positive outcomes for low-income kids. In addition to our grant-making programs, we focus a lot on convening people, bringing groups together, and building a sense of common purpose and community. Ultimately, the work that we're engaged in is about cultivating high opportunity communities and about ensuring that zip code plays a smaller role in determining opportunity. We believe that economic mobility shouldn't be determined by the neighborhood that you're born into. It falls on all of us to create a new narrative, to critique and change these systems, and ultimately to build communities where all kids can thrive. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We've covered a lot of ground together. And now I'm going to pass it back to Georgia for some deeper thinking about how this research applies to your own life and to your own neighborhood.
Thank you so much, Madeline. I'm always amazed at the amount of insight we get into our lived experience through research like this. So I'd like to give us another bit of space to reflect on what we've learned. It's a lot of information, and we've identified 4 primary areas of focus that determine opportunity in a neighborhood. And those were education, employment rates, social capital, and integration. So what I'd like you to think about and journal about for a moment is the how these focus areas show up in your current neighborhood. So go ahead and pull out your PDF again. And I'd like you to, it's the back page of the document. So thinking about your own neighborhood, I'd like you to write some notes on education. And I'm going to give you some starter ideas to get your brain moving in this area. So education, do the kids on your block go to the local public school? When you think about schools in your neighborhood, what do you think about? What comes up for you first? Do you perceive your neighbors as having access? I'm sorry, do you perceive your local grade school or high school as high quality? I'll give you a minute to write down some notes there. It's okay if you don't know. That itself in itself is interesting. So employment rates. Do you perceive your neighbors as having access to living wage jobs? When you think about the living wage jobs that you do perceive around you, are they accessible by walking, public transport? Do they require a car? When you think about your neighborhood, do you think it's a mix of kinds of employment, both hourly wage and professional wage? So social capital, again, you're just writing down brief notes to get the mind working. So social capital, do you know your neighbors' names? I actually see one of my neighbors in this conversation, which is nice. Do you think your neighbors also know each other? When you're in your neighborhood, do you feel a sense of safety? As you move throughout your neighborhood, do you feel like the people you see also may feel safe too, or not? Do you think their experience reflects your experience of safety? In an emergency, do you feel like you could reach out to your neighbors for help? And moving on to integration, which seems like a complex technical term, but we've broken it down into some things we can notice. So the first is, do you notice that there are different holidays or cultures celebrated in your neighborhood? Do you perceive a diversity of political views among your neighbors? Do you notice a diversity of family structures and household structures in your neighborhood? From single folks to small families to older families, multi-generational families, older folks who are living alone, younger folks who are living alone, folks with roommates. All right, so we're going to move on to the next question. But again, it might be interesting to note some things, maybe the little star or something, or a heart, something you don't know the answer to. And that might be actually more relevant as we ask the next question. If we could get the next slide, thank you. Now think about the neighborhood next to yours. I know I live in downtown and there's several neighborhoods around me. So just choose one, the first one you think about. And we're going to ask the same questions. So thinking about this neighborhood, and it's helpful to maybe get a sense of a street corner or an intersection that you think of this neighborhood. How do you perceive the quality of schools in that neighborhood? How about graduation rates in the local high school for that neighborhood? Do you have a sense that the kids in that neighborhood go to the local school or not? Employment rates. Do you perceive that there's access to living wage jobs in that neighborhood? Does it seem like folks in that neighborhood are walking to work, public transport, or do they need to drive? If they have public transport, is it probably one connection to get where they need to go, or is it multiple connections to get where they need to go? Social capital. Do you feel like there's a sense of safety in that neighborhood? Do you think others feel that way about safety in that neighborhood? Are you conscious of any neighborhood groups in that neighborhood that folks seem to be engaged with? Now for integration, when you think about this neighborhood, do you notice a diversity of types of cars parked on the streets? How about modes of transportation generally? Do you feel like there's a mix of rentals and single family houses? Or other alternative ways of living? Do you think that the work that is available is a mix of both hourly and professional wage jobs? Now, again, if you don't know, that's always interesting too. We are going to send lots of links in the follow-up to this that will give you access to the Opportunity Atlas and the report that would allow you to dig deeper to understand your own place and the locations that surround you. And also, I'm fascinated to go east and look into the rural areas as well. So thank you so much for making these notes. I appreciate your willingness to be engaged. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move you into some breakout rooms. They're totally random. It's going to be 3 folks per room. And you're going to get 1 minute to share what you've noticed in your journaling answers so far. So I'm not necessarily interested in a recitation of what you noticed, but rather what has been surprising to you, inspiring to you, motivating, Is there anything about the research that you're fascinated by? So a little housekeeping. After you're all in the breakout rooms, I'd love you to introduce yourselves by first name. And the person whose first name is first in the alphabet gets to go first. So also every minute or so, Jen will send an alert, which tells you that it's time to switch. So you don't have to worry about the time, but do make space for the next person to share as well. So into the breakout rooms, we will all now go. And then we'll be back in about 3 minutes. I guess we get to be together in this moment. How's it going so far?
Great, we're right on track. Perfect.
Madeline, how did you feel about your space?
Good. I definitely tripped a lot more than I did in my practicing, but that's always how it goes, right? So
Yes, indeed.
but it ended up being even quicker than I thought. I think I talked much faster than I did when I practiced, as people tend to do. But it's good. Hopefully people have a little bit more space now to kind of think and engage a little bit. I'm wondering if Jen's gotten any questions, or I've gotten a couple like direct messages, which I'm happy to field and is great. But if there's anything else that we need to think about.
I haven't gotten any questions. We did have quite a few people drop out when you said breakout room. So I was frantically reassigning people to make sure everybody had 3. So hopefully that remained. I'm getting ready to broadcast the first message now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was wondering about that. Would the breakout rooms be a problem?
Well, they usually are. Like it's so throughout the presentation, if I got a little bit behind on any slides, it's because I was reassigning people really quick. So I'm sorry, I got behind on a couple of them. But
No, it's all good.
okay.
No worries at all.
Good. I think it went really well.
We get 2 people back.
hmm.
Kendall, hi, nice to see you.
Hi. I'm without group.
Oh no, that means people dropped off when we sent you. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
Do you want me to try?
I kind of
to
feel
assign
like
you?
I'm with the cool kids. I'm like,
I can try to put you in a room if you'd like. It's up to you.
yeah, that's great. Send me.
Okay,
send
let
off
me
to no home.
see. Okay, I'm gonna send you off.
Bye,
All
Kendall.
right. Okay, I'm gonna broadcast the next.
Yeah, great, go.
Hey.
Funnily, Kendall is an economist and data scientist.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is going really well. So
Mhm.
awesome job, everyone.
Agreed.
Very smooth.
I have the video all queued up, Georgia. So there will just be a pause from when I stop sharing, and I mean, you'll see it, you know, the slides come down, the video come up, and then the video come down and the slides come up.
Cool. It'll be Sarah Grace and then lovely Pipa Aaron.
Mhm.
Great. Yeah, I feel like Madeline, you would love to geek out with Kendall. She does, has done a lot of work around pay parity and using census data. I think she works for the federal government last time I heard from her.
Fascinating.
Yeah, she's like, it's like sitting on the biggest pile of data.
Yeah, I don't know if I should have included my email or something in the slides, but if those things are going to get sent out as part of follow-up too, because anybody who's got questions or like wants to engage with this, I forgot to mention that as well when I was talking, but you know, I love geeking out about this stuff. So anybody who has questions or thoughts or grievances, I don't know, I want to hear it all. I love it.
Yeah, I think if we can put both of our emails in the follow-up email, that would be great.
Yeah,
Sounds
and even if
okay.
you just want to drop them in now or like when we're back, I would be, that sounds great too.
Okay.
Okay, we're just about it. I'm giving them 15 seconds
Great.
warning. So I'm giving that now.
Thank you.
And is that the final speed, the third speaker, Jen?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great.
Okay.
I'm going to go
Hide again.
there, Grace. It's all you.
Hi there. I think everyone's heading back in. Welcome back. I'm Sarah Grace McElveen. I'm a senior philanthropic advisor with Oregon Community Foundation, and I'm based in our Portland office. Thank you so much for taking some time to reflect about your own place and the places around you. It's important because data is just one measurement of community vitality. Data can't describe the nuances and complexities of this great state. All communities have assets to build on, and their history, culture, and values can be vibrant, regardless of these opportunity metrics. There are many dedicated organizations working to bring more opportunity in different ways to make our state a healthier and more equitable place. If you're inspired to find ways to take action to close the opportunity gap that we've learned about today, I encourage you to look into these groups. You'll receive a link to each of their websites and a follow-up email from us in the coming days. The mission of the Oregon Community Foundation is to improve the lives for all Oregonians through the power of philanthropy. Part of how we do this is by conducting research like what you've heard about today and sharing it so that donors can make informed decisions with how to invest their philanthropic dollars. While OCF offers services for donors to give during their lifetimes or through their estate plans, our overarching goal is simply to inspire giving whenever and however it works for you. If you'd like to know more about the organizations listed here, more about the Oregon Community Foundation, or if you simply just want to brainstorm about how you can create the impact you desire through charitable giving, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will put my contact information in the chat, as will Madeline, if you have any other questions after the presentation. And now Georgia has a giving story to share with us.
Thank you, Sarah Grace. So I wanted to bring in the lived experience of an individual who was really inspiring to me and a decision that she made. And so a dear friend of mine is, and a friend of the firm is Pipa Aaron. She was born here in Portland, Oregon. She's a longtime lover of the Willamette Valley. And we have a video from her, but a little bit about her. She was initially studied Bauhaus painting, as people often do, and choreography at Marlborough College. And then she went to Eastern Europe, came back to Portland, made art furniture. And then at the turn of the millennium, she met the women with whom she would found PAIR, a wonderful organization here in Portland, a nonprofit that works with homeless youth. So she served as a youth mentor and development director for PAIR for 2 decades, pursuing more than, as she says, not just social work, but social artwork. Now she's launching a fun consulting firm to work with donors to create personal philanthropic visions and support all the good work in the world. Now, due to an asset sale, she made the choice to give a percentage of the sale proceeds for reparations. And I wanted her to be able to share a little bit about her experience.
Hi, my name is Pipa Aaron, and Georgia asked me to speak today to talk about some recent gifts that I made, how I gave them, why I gave them. So specifically, I sold a piece of property earlier this year, and when I was talking with Georgia about this, she suggested the idea of 1% to reparations. And I had never thought about that concept being related to me. So I was moved by that idea and went and thought about it and came back to her and I said, actually, what feels right to me is actually 3%. So what I did is decided on some organizations that are relatively local and made those gifts personally, actually, which I'll come to, but specifically I gave to the Albina Vision Trust. I want to support the Albina neighborhood, which is part of our Portland community, which was of course decimated in the 50s and 60s to make room for the freeway. And I'm really interested in giving some money to support the rebuilding of that neighborhood. I also gave to Accelerate with this idea of let's support women in business. That's just, it's always a good thing. And I also decided to give a percentage to CREED, which is an organization based in Warm Springs, which supports Indigenous language and culture in the region. So amazing organizations. I did round the numbers a little bit, so I had a little bit left over, and I gave that money to Equitable Giving Circle. This is a local organization that pays farmers of color money for their produce and then gives that produce to people who need it, people who are hungry. So all these organizations seemed really important to me. I I gave personally, I did not choose to give through my OCF fund. I wrote checks personally, and I did that because when I've given philanthropically in the past, I've done so in such a way where I've hidden myself. My OCF fund does not have my name on it. So in the community, it looks anonymous, or, you know, from a fund that you can't trace. And I've done that to protect myself. Also, money is awkward. It's weird to be a donor. But with this money, I felt like it was part of my responsibility to attach my name, especially if it's going to have this idea of reparations, whether I use that word publicly or not in the larger context. This is about the sale of personal land and doing what I can as my individual person to say, this is how I would rather have this money be used. So thanks, that's all.
So we wanted to share that story from Pipa because I think it's always interesting to gather ideas about how we could act in generosity, that we sort of create a toolbox for ourselves that gives us some modeling and some opportunities. And we are very passionate about impacting racial wealth inequality here at Modernist. That's what we give to. 3% of our revenue, gross revenue every year, goes to impacting racial wealth inequality. And so I've been asking this question: what if when you sell something, you thought about making a gift for reparations? And so it's an interesting one of the tools that's available to you. So we're going to have one last little prompt as a way to gather all the things you've been thinking into a next step. I find that can really help us frame and complete a learning experience. So I'd like you to write down the first thing that comes to mind. What could you shift as one small step to act on what you've discovered today? Again, what could you shift as one small step to act on what you've discovered today? It can be nice to attach a date that you might like to do this thing, theoretically, if you wanted to. Think about how you might do it, who you might do it with. Now, what I'd like to open up some space for is, if you want to share your one small step, you're welcome to share it in the chat. I also want to note that both Sarah, Grace, and Madeline have shared their email addresses with you. So if you want to follow up and ask Madeline questions about the report, talk to Sarah, Grace about OCF's work, please do so. Our email address will also drop in there, is hello@modernistfinancial.com. You'll also be getting an email from us. The other thing that you could also share in the chat is anything you're grateful for from this conversation. It's always a supportive neuroscientific proven idea that gratitude helps us frame our experiences. So the next slide, please. I just want to thank you all for joining us. It was really fun. I'm really glad that we got to dig into this conversation more deeply. And thank you, Madeline and Sarah, Grace, and Jen, and Tracy, and all of Team Modernist for being part of this wild idea I had like 9 months ago. I was like, oh, we should totally do something on the interwebs or wherever. So thank you all for being involved. I also want to let you know that email will be coming out probably tomorrow. That will have a link to all the things that we discussed, and hopefully also a video of our conversation. Wanted to let you know that we will be having one more event that will be happening in January. We do these events called Modernist Money Stories, which are really a way to bring people together in intimate conversations about questions that are meaningful or evocative. And so the January 26th conversation is really a follow-on to this experience. And it's called, the question we'll address is there a responsibility associated with wealth? And if yes, what could it be? The event is limited to 12 to 15 people, so we'll throw out the link for that as well. And I believe that's what we've got for today. This has been so great, and I'm so grateful for everyone participating. And I hope you all, we're giving you 5 minutes back in your day. I hope you get to take a moment to be present in your bodies and enjoy the sunshine if you have that right now. And thank you so much for being present with us today. Ciao.